All right. Well, in recent months, some international travelers have been pressured to hand over their smartphones and laptops at the airport. In some cases, travelers have been asked to forego their passwords. But Brian X. Chen, a columnist and lead consumer tech writer at the New York Times, says you can't provide access to your data if you don't hold the keys. Brian, we're going to get to what you can do to protect yourself in these situations later, but let's start with why governments would even be interested in looking through our phones, tablets, and laptops and other gadgets in the first place.
Well, there's a number of reasons why you might be searched when you're crossing the border. So if you're suspected of any sort of terrorist activity, or I mean, there's tons of reasons for why your information is definitely useful for people to know about at this point, including if you're a journalist, for example. Like, people are interested in who your social media contacts are, who your sources might be. So it's really just open to your imagination at this point.
Well, that being said, what sort of rights do we have, as any travelers do, when running into border agents who are asking for access to this sorts of sensitive data?
Legally speaking, you're not required to give up your passwords for your social media accounts. You're not legally required to unlock your phone either. But oftentimes when you go through border or when you go through customs, people don't really abide by those rules. That is, Border Patrol agents don't necessarily abide by those rules, and they try to use intimidation. So you should know your rights, as in, like, you don't have to give out this information, but just know that if you try to resist, they're going to try to make it very uncomfortable for you.
It's interesting because it's so, it's based on a lot of the, old-fashioned rules. Like, you say in your piece, the one thing you shouldn't do is lie. But,
right,
to me, it's like, well, your password, you don't have to give up your password necessarily, but if you say, it's like giving up your license, I don't even think that is really, it's illegal for them to ask that. But once you don't do it, you're going to immediately look suspicious. You're going to miss your flight, and you're going to end up, being, depending on probably, sadly, what you look like, you're going to be held for a long time, and that's, absolutely not right. So, there's a few things that you say to do. You say you disable your fingerprint reader. Now, why would you do that?
In legal cases, judges have been able to compel people to share their passcodes, but so far they haven't been able to compel someone to provide their fingerprint to unlock their phone. It was the other way around. Sorry. They've been able to compel people to use their fingerprint to unlock their phone, but not their passcodes. And part of the reason why is just the right to remain silent and not share any information that might incriminate you. So the passcode is a little bit trickier to get people to share than the fingerprint itself. That said, it's not going to be impossible for a Border Patrol agent to make you share your passcode, but I think it's much harder to. So you might as well just turn off your fingerprint sensor when you're crossing the border. That's my tip.
It was pretty fascinating to see this column drop on a Tuesday. And then on the same day, I'm sure you couldn't have guessed it, both the United States and the United Kingdom announced a ban on the in-flight usage of electronics bigger than a smartphone from 10 Muslim-majority countries into the U.S. and the U.K.
Right.
How did that, change affect the advice that you're giving us here? And does it kind of speak to maybe a fluidity of the situation of this?
Well, it's funny that coincidentally that happened, but I had done this column I'd written about 2 weeks ago, and that news about the so basically the new rule or regulation on airlines coming from certain countries to the United States is that you can only bring cell phones onto the flight, whereas you have to check in anything that's larger than that, like laptops or tablets, have to go in checked luggage. And what was convenient about that story publishing the same day, this story we're talking about, was that a lot of the same rules apply that you should have already been doing in the first place. So now that you have to check your luggage, check your laptops into luggage, you should be encrypting your devices. You should be turning on two-step verification and so on, because if the TSA or somebody checks your laptop while it's being checked in, then it's much harder for them to look at your data if you encrypt the files.
You also recommend that people use LastPass, which is a great recommendation in general for security.
Right.
But couldn't they? If you say, "Oh well, it's all I don't know my passwords," but couldn't they then ask for your LastPass password to get all your passwords?
I think a good way to get around that is to just not know your master password either. Have it written down and leave it with someone you trust at home. Call that person when you get to the place that you're trying to get and ask them for the master password. So there's really very little that anybody can do to you if you just simply don't know the information. They could try to put a gun up to your head. They could interrogate you for hours, but if you just don't know your passwords, including your master password, then what are they going to do? So ignorance is probably the best tool here.
It sounds like in this case, ignorance is not only blessed, but like a protection measure, which is kind of hilarious to think of. Now, with these tips, really, focusing on international travel, does this sort of stuff apply to traveling within a country or within state lines? I mean, how much can this really be applied to any sort of law enforcement agencies?
I think these tips apply mostly to traveling abroad and coming back to the United States from abroad. And it's going to vary depending on where you're coming from. If you're coming from China, you probably do want to use, say, example, a burner device like an extra cell phone you might have or an extra laptop that doesn't have your sensitive data on it. I think we have to be careful and we have to be diligent about researching the different rules for different countries and, the privacy laws there before we, make considerations of what exactly we're going to do with our data. But, that's a key takeaway is that you have to research where you're going and what privacy protections there are around your data before you travel there.
So essentially what you're saying is if you're going to travel abroad to these places, pretend like you're going to DEF CON.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good rule of thumb, but this is the world we're living in right now. Yeah.
All right, well, I'll ask you one last thing before we let you go here. I'm sure there are going to be some folks watching this who are saying, why not just give the access to all the stuff? Why not let them just see all of your selfies, possibly your naked photos, whatever you got on your phone, whatever it is you got? Why not just give them the full access? What have you got to hide? What would you say to those folks, Brian?
I mean, it's a strange attitude, it's like, do you really it's like the equivalent of letting in a stranger into your home and letting them just look through all your stuff. Everybody has a right to privacy, especially if you haven't done anything wrong, then you should do whatever you can to safeguard whatever information that you have. If you don't need to be giving this stuff up, then you should make it as hard as possible for people to get access to your information. That's all there is to it. You have a right to privacy.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that, just for me to say, oh, well, I'm an old white lady. No one cares about me. And, it's like that is a privilege. And I shouldn't, I shouldn't abuse that privilege, I think. It's like Bruce Schneier says, like, don't send postcards because, it's like we all should put our mail in envelopes because we should all support the fact that everyone deserves to have, have privacy. So, yeah, I totally agree with this. And it's hard because, I don't want to miss my plane to wherever I'm going.
Yep.
Like, I don't want to have to, sit in a place. But I think that, there are other things you can do, right, besides having to stand up at the airport. I mean, there's organizations that you could support that, other, like, sign petitions, do all those kinds of things, too.
Awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Brian. Brian's weekly column, Tech Fix, appears online in the New York Times on Tuesdays and in print on Wednesdays. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Or print on Thursdays, online on Wednesdays or Tuesdays, depending what mood we're in. But yeah, I mean, you can find me at the New York Times or on Twitter at BXChen.
Awesome. Is there anywhere else we can find you online?
You can find me on the Buzzkill podcast, which you're also on, which is on SoundCloud.
All right. Yeah, sorry. Full disclosure, we're friends and we make a weekly podcast together. So
SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, etc. All the places that podcasts can be found.
All right.
All right. Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thanks
Brian.
All right, bye.